Recently, you may have noticed that Facebook and Instagram have been putting up fact checks on posts that would link inflation to corporate greed. So now they claim that, oh no, see, there's no context here. If you're blaming corporate greed on the inflation, well, that's just not true. The real cause of inflation is too much federal spending. We just got too much federal spending, too much money, that went to you in social programs, and that's the reason that you're paying so much. Now, I'm going to give you some examples here of these posts that were earning fact checks, so-called fact checks. One post on Instagram pointed out that ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and BP have all recently reported their highest profits since the mid-2010s, while Americans were left with higher gas prices. The post said, I guess that's just inflation. So wait, you're saying inflation has nothing to do with these gigantic profit margins? Ridiculous. On Facebook, another post accusing Chipotle, Starbucks, and McDonald's, once again, three companies that have massive, massive profits and have given out massive executive bonuses, they raised their prices, right? That was given a fact check message and said, oh, you can't blame that on corporate greed, though, the inflation. You can't look at these situations with all these large companies that are massively profitable and yet still blame raising their prices on inflation. You can't blame that on corporate greed at all. Now, both of those fact checks are linked to an Agents France Press article. So now in it, I read it, it's farcical. It's hilariously bad. So let me give you some parts of that. So now this, again, blames price increases on big federal spending, heightened demand, and supply problems, not corporate greed. Experts rejected the idea that corporations are the main culprit. Who's your expert? A corporation? I mean, look, Mitt Romney said corporations are people, so very much likely that it's a giant corporation. I mean, they're people, my friend. Here's who AFP quotes in their fact check. Desmond Lockman, a senior fellow at the think tank, the right-wing think tank, the American Enterprise Institute. That's who did their fact check. Well, now, again, the American Enterprise Institute gets tons of money from trade groups, from corporations. And so, of course, he's going to come out and say, oh, no, it's not corporate greed at all. What are you talking about? He said this, after saying that it's far-fetched to think that it's just corporate greed. Quote, if they've got the power to push up prices, to gouge, well, why didn't they do it before the pandemic? Oh, okay. They did. Prices have been going up slowly before the pandemic on a lot of different things. Now, not as dramatically now as a result of the pandemic, and I'm going to get into that. But here, he says, quote, oh, you might find some instances where people are taking advantage of the situation to jack up prices, but that's not really what's driving inflation. Really? Now, here's the thing. As I said, pre-pandemic, prices had been going up. Wages have been generally pretty stagnant, but prices continue to rise. Rents continued to rise. We've all seen that's a problem. Tuition for school tends to rise and rose quite a bit pre-pandemic. Now, again, it wasn't as dramatic, but if you look at some of the charts, starting from like 1960, 1970, even more recent times, 1980, 1990, 2000, you'll see that there's been a definite rise in prices. However, inflation continues to go. However, wages continue to be stagnant. But now here's the thing. The pandemic comes. And for a while, you had companies that had to shut down. Now, a lot of these companies, they got a bunch of free money. They got billions of dollars in corporate handouts. A lot of which these companies that got them didn't actually need. Again, there's a legitimate need in certain small businesses that ended up getting pandemic relief. And I have no problem with that. But then you had a lot of big corporations that came in and just basically bogarted it. They come in and be like, ooh, free government money with no strings attached or very few strings. Yes. Yeah, we're going to go. Of course, we're going to grab it. Massive redistribution of wealth to the top. That's what happened here. That's what happened here. Not to mention the trillions of dollars in quantitative easing from the Fed going right to the banks. The banks who still are refusing to lend to people in a lot of cases. So now, the end of the pandemic, and by the way, the other thing about gas, right? So you have OPEC Plus. It's not like Disney Plus, it's OPEC Plus. That decided that since they lost out on some profits during the pandemic, they were going to slow their production in order to raise the prices of gas to make their money back. That's why you're paying more at the pump. It is corporate greed. And of course, it's a false scarcity. They intentionally limited the supply of fossil fuels, of gasoline, so that they could make more money. But again, it went up slowly, pandemic hits, and then you do get a legitimate supply chain crisis. Because yes, the pandemic did disrupt supply chains, and we are still having issues today. There's no doubt about that. And yes, there is demand that's up as well. But here's the thing. These companies said, well, we're going to take advantage of this. Yes, we're going to raise our prices to offset inflation. And then we're going to go even further. We're going to go much further so we can get as much profit as we can. Because now we have an excuse. Now we have an excuse. And now you also have corporate media, obviously, that now drums it into your head that, oh no, it's not because of corporate greed at all. No, there's just too much federal spending. It's too hot. Too hot. Meaning, of course, that they are blaming not the corporate welfare. They're blaming the aid given to you and your family. There's another one. The Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center's Benjamin Page said this, quote, the theory that firms suddenly became more greedy doesn't pass the smell test. Oh, really? They didn't suddenly become more greedy. They've always been greedy. They've always been greedy. Complete and utter bullshit. Yes, corporate greed plays a gigantic role in all of this. Again, I'm not discounting the fact that there is increased demand and there is limited supply. I get that. But CEOs have taken advantage of this to far offset or to far, gouge on more than they actually needed to offset their losses from actual supply chain issues, from inflation. Okay? In fact, we go to some of the calls that these CEOs have had with investors. Coach CEO Todd Kahn told the Wall Street Journal, quote, for Coach, the rise in prices isn't really about inflation. It's about reducing discounting. Oh, okay, so yeah, we're just reducing discounting. The CEO of Amatec, which makes instruments for medical and aerospace companies, said that their company is raising prices more this year, more than needed to make up for inflation, which of course would be corporate greed. Here's what CEO David Zapico said in a November earnings call. In the third quarter, our pricing increases continued to more than offset inflation. Great. We also have Mike Roman, CEO of 3M. So now 3M is a manufacturer of the N95 mask. So very necessary to have these masks, right? In places where there's high COVID infection rates, okay, high COVID spread, to try to reduce that. Now he said on a call, he praised his team for doing a marvelous job in driving price, meaning, of course, driving up the price. Those masks have gone up from 0.1% to 1.4% to 2.6%. That's the rate of inflation. Tyson saw their profits nearly double after price hikes of 32% on beef and 20% on chicken, in which the CEO attributed to the continued resilience of our multi-protein portfolio. Johnson & Johnson, Kimberly-Clark, again, very profitable companies that made billions of dollars during the pandemic. They raised their prices anyway. If you're raising your prices far beyond what you need to offset inflation, then that is corporate greed. That is price gouging. And we are seeing that. We are seeing that. This fact check is bullshit. Total bullshit. And yes, as some of you pointed out, the price of meat going up was happening before the pandemic. It was going up under Trump in 2020. So, yes, total garbage. But what do you expect from a massive corporation? These news companies, these news actors, they're all out there telling you that it's your fault. No, corporations could never be greedy. What are you talking about? I don't understand why anybody would ever say that against our wonderful corporations. How dare you? You must be lying. And by the way, Facebook, another gigantic corporation, also says, hey, this is, look, we got this fact check from AFP, and, if you continue to lie in your in your articles, because our fact check says this, well, then we're going to have to limit your reach. We're going to have to make it so that people don't see what's actually going on here, and in a way to control the message. That's what's going on here. They're going to continue to defend places that raise their prices to price gouge you in an already incredibly difficult time. And they're not doing anything to help you. And by the way, while they're not doing anything to help you, they're also at the same time blaming you for the very problem that they are causing. And you have the corporate media, any of these big tech companies that are letting them get away with it. Disgusting. This is what it's like to live under corporate rule.